Welcome to episode 34 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. I and my brilliant co-hosts, Alison Ettridge from Lightcast and Toby Culshaw from Amazon, had the pleasure of speaking with Cole Napper, VP of Research and Innovation at Lightcast and host of the Directionally Correct podcast. In the news segment, we explored fascinating discussions around talent supply chains and strategic assets, the global shortage of AI talent with a special focus on China, Middle East, Korea and Japan's challenges, and how countries are developing long-term skills strategies, with some planning as far ahead as 2070. In our conversation with Cole, who brings incredible cross-industry experience from roles at FedEx, Texas Instruments, PepsiCo, Toyota and more, we delved into his unique approach of gaining breadth and depth across multiple industries, the convergence of people analytics, workforce planning and talent intelligence, how behavioural science plays a crucial role in understanding human capital, his journey to Lightcast and vision for the future of workforce data, practical tips for breaking down silos between talent-focused teams, the challenge of balancing productivity demands with employer engagements, and much, much more. So grab your favourite beverage, settle in for a data-rich discussion, and let's explore the intersection of analytics, intelligence and planning with Cole Napper. Get listening, get learning, and stay intelligent, folks, and have fun. Before we get on with the main event, I wanted to remind you that Lightcast kindly sponsors this podcast. Here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you more about them.
Lightcast is the global authority on labour market data. By collecting, analysing and refining profiles, job postings and market data globally, Lightcast provides actionable, data-driven talent intelligence, giving HR leaders the context to make better decisions. The world's top companies trust Lightcast to deliver clarity in a complex world of work. For more, visit lightcast.io.
Hey there, talent intelligent folk. You've tuned into episode 34 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast, and have we got a treat for you today?
Yay!
Joining me in our virtual studio are my partners in crime, Alison Ettridge from Lightcast and Toby Culshaw from Amazon. Give a virtual verbal wave to the listeners, you two.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
And now, speaking of Lightcast, today's guest is actually a colleague of Alison's, and trust me, this is going to be fascinating. He's a podcaster himself, hosting what he modestly calls, and we can only assume is true, the number one people analytics podcast, and he's recently become the VP of Research and Innovation at Lightcast. Please welcome Cole Napper. Cole, hello.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And our podcast is called Directionally Correct, and so most of my answers will probably fit within that vein today, I imagine.
Excellent. It's great to have you here. Would you mind just giving the audience a quick intro as to who you are?
Sure. So recently joined Lightcast, like you mentioned. I've spent the majority of my career, though, being a practitioner. So a background in IO psychology, then worked for some big companies like FedEx, Texas Instruments, PepsiCo, Toyota, CenturyLink, Grainger, and also for a few startups as well. So I'm really looking forward to discussing some of my experiences today.
Excellent. It's brilliant to have you here, Cole. And I've got to ask, as someone who hosts their own podcast, how does it feel being on the other side of the mic?
Oh, I've done it a few times. The thing that I enjoy the most is just having that kind of conversational format, which is what I think you guys' podcast is like. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. So for anyone who's joining us for the first time on the podcast, here's the running order, the deal. We'll kick off with Toby sharing the latest and greatest from the world of talent intelligence. Then we'll hand over to Alison, who I suspect might have a slightly different kind of conversation with Cole, given their colleagues. And who knows, maybe we'll get some behind-the-scenes insights to what's happening over there. Toby, what's happening in the world of talent intelligence news?
Yeah, so first up, it's a little piece by Forbes. It's how well-crafted talent supply chains create a competitive advantage. I quite liked it. Well, I quite liked it, but I didn't, is the honest answer. So I like where it's going. I like it's essentially looking at your whole talent ecosystem as a supply chain and trying to bring supply chain management methodology. Oh, that's a lot big word for this time of the year. And structure and process and value into the talent ecosystem. And it's obviously playing on the fact that we often hear the people are our biggest asset, talent is our biggest asset, but we're not treated in an asset management and a supply chain perspective in the same way. So it's a really interesting article. I'd love to have gone further, if I'm going to be honest. The reason that I kind of had a little dig at it is it was a really nice read, really easy read, but it could have been 10 times as long, and I'd have really dug into it more and more. I think this, for me, lends itself really nicely into the conversations we've had in the past with people like Martin Hansen around total workforce management, and the fact that as HR, we probably need to grow a bit more teeth around how aggressively and how strategically we manage the workforce, and what tools and techniques and everything else we're using around that. It still feels like we're largely reactive for a lot of this stuff, and we're still reactive around that supply chain piece. And I think, obviously, you can use external labour market data with TI to try and mitigate this, and workforce planning to try and mitigate this stuff. But it was a nice kind of refreshing read to say, actually, look, we probably do need to step this up. And obviously, Forbes is a big outlet, and it's a big general business outlet. So it was quite interesting to see that they're jumping into this stuff as well.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I like the fact it was... I like the fact it was in Forbes and therefore being read by the business community and business leaders. But I think because we're in this space, it therefore felt like it lacked some of the substance that we would want, right? So it was very much, this is what you should be treating your access to talent in the same way that you treat your access to any other asset that your business needs, right? So that as a concept is awesome. But I think, and I like the idea, as you said, it was looking at the whole workforce dynamic. So, and it didn't really touch necessarily all the stuff that Martin talks about, but including contractor-based and all the rest of it. But it didn't really give a granular way of looking at how you do that, or talking about how you do it from a skills perspective, or how to make it dynamic. All of which is critical to making workforce supply chain work. But I guess because it was in Forbes and because of the audience it was going to, it needed to be at that level.
And it was also written by somebody trying to sell some software to help people do this type of stuff.
Yeah, of course it was.
Just to caveat that to the audience.
Yeah, and actually you're so right, because it talked about static talent technology. And I was like, that's a million miles away from where lots of HR tech is now. Most of us are now dynamic in some way, shape or form. So you're right, it was written by someone who was trying to flog something.
Exactly. I like... Sorry, Cole, you go.
Oh, if you're trying to learn something, I'm typically not going to go to a venue like Forbes, because I want to go to some individuals who are writing to kind of their own community, whereas Forbes is trying to write for a broad mass appeal. Yeah. And so they're going to take, the least common denominator and put out, if you have no starting point in talent, what would you need to know? And I think that the taking the metaphor of the supply chain probably really helps with that audience. But most of the things that I've written and that I like to read are more written for practitioners who are already experts in the space. And that's where I really feel like I learned something.
Yeah, agreed. But then I guess that then what we need to do is we need to celebrate the fact that this is going to the masses, right? Because that's what we all need, is that we need organizations to be thinking about their workforce in a different way. And so, let's celebrate the fact that this is being talked to as if it were a common language across all businesses, which we all know it isn't yet. So, it's a starting point.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's not going to challenge anyone's thinking in terms of the people that are on the cusp and the kind of the more creative, the thought leadership people, the people that are innovating, etc. And I know we've spoken many times around the old 80-20 rule, where 80% of the industry, of most industries, are just ambivalent. They just turn up for a paycheck. They don't really care. 20% want to change, want to push things, want to be more dynamic, want to get things moving. And then of that, I think there's probably 80% that are on the wall and just observing. And then 20% that are actually out there talking and pushing things and trying to be explicit and change the industry. But that means you've got 4% of an industry trying to change the other 96. I think at least with this Forbes article, it kind of hits that 80 to even challenge their ways of thinking, and give Alison, to your point, a really simple frame of reference for human capital issues. I know when I was at Philips, the VP of TA there, Cynthia, who's awesome, by the way, she often used to refer to us as a supply chain. We're a supply chain organization of human capital. And what that meant was we had a really clear pushback when things like the demand signal was weak. So if we weren't getting good demand planning and good forecast data and accurate headcount need data from a business, it was suddenly very, very clear to them, because we could say, well, if we were doing the same with you for any of your parts, for any of your MRI machines or anything, you wouldn't get an MRI machine out the door. So it gives a really clean frame of reference to simplify this stuff for the conversation. But 100% agree, Cole, that it's not challenging the creative ways of thinking. And I actually think supply chain itself is moving on. So we should be kind of thinking, where's it going to, not where do we need to catch up to?
Yeah, I love that concept of the supply chain of human capital, though. I just think that's, it's a really neat little snippet, just that Philips stories brings it to life for people.
I'm not sure if I was meant to reference that, Cynthia. If you would listen to this, I do apologise if I'm breaking confidence there.
But hopefully you made up for it by saying she was awesome. Yeah, exactly. Toby, so it'll be okay, the yin and the yang. What else is happening?
I think that the other biggest thing I saw, obviously, it's we've just gone through the festive period. Depending on people listening to this, that might come as a shocker to you. But so there hasn't been a huge amount, I'd say, within the news. I think the US and post-Trump elections, or post-Trump, and waiting through to see what happens there, waiting to see what's happening with the H1Bs, etc. It's all kind of a bit quiet and in a holding pattern to wait and see. The one thing that's really kind of kicking on, and still we've discussed it kind of briefly in the last couple of sessions, and it isn't going away, is the sheer lack of AI talent that's going around. And we're really seeing that impact at a national scale now. So there's a few different things I saw. So there's a piece I saw around China facing AI talent shortages, which is no surprise. They've got the biggest tech army in the world, but they're facing some talent shortages. Huawei has released the Gold Talent, which is a program, ICT competition, to try and drum up and push ICT and AI talent in the Middle East and Central Asia region. Korea is facing an AI talent outflow as Japan is kind of ramping up, and they're seeing a lot of their talent shift across to Japan and stand that up. So it's not a problem that's getting solved. For all the talk we see online and for all the kind of rhetoric of AI is going to be taking software engineering jobs, AI is enabling X number of jobs to be replaced. Yes, I think there is something there, and yes, I actually think there's an enabling function kind of capacity for the AI piece. But AI talent in of itself, and that kind of subsection within tech, it's not a problem that's going away. It's not getting any easier to hire these people.
I thought this was, so two really big things that leapt out at me on this. The first was I did a search in the software and went, okay, well, what are the top 10 locations for AI and Gen AI talent around the globe? And China, Riyadh, Middle East, or Korea didn't appear in any of the top 30. So fundamentally, the focus was US, India, London, Canada, Paris, Italy, Singapore. Right. So that was the first thing that I just thought was really interesting. It was like, well, okay, there's no surprise there, but they're not in the top 30 for the supply of talent, i.e. where are the people now? The second thing that I think was really interesting was that this was, it kind of focused my mind actually on a piece I'm writing at the moment. That'll be out by the time this is published, but that looks at the countries that, fundamentally a country now needs a long-term skills strategy in order to drive economic development. And we learnt that in the Middle East. We learnt it in the UAE. It's interesting that the Riyadh focus with Hawaii is through UNESCO, which is all about how do we drive these skills in the Middle East. And it's interesting that, countries like Japan and Singapore have got long-term strategic goals. So, yeah, I mean, for me, those were the two things that kind of leapt out. No surprise, because it's not where all the people are anyway. And then two, well, you've got to have a longer term skills strategy.
I think what's really interesting is that, just to counter all of this week alone, I think it was a couple of days ago, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said that they're confident of achieving AGI, so artificial general intelligence, so intelligence that's the level of humans, this year.
Yeah.
And they believe they have the route, the path, the understanding to build ASI, so artificial superintelligence, within the next 5 years.
Wow.
So if we achieve that, then all the rest of it totally irrelevant. We won't need humans, genuinely.
Well, but we will do, won't we? Because
not
it's still...
not if superintelligence is achieved.
Yeah, but we've still, OpenAI still needs people in order to do it, and they can't hang on to all of the people that they've got. So, it's just, you're right, the longer term is going to be, well, where are these skills and what do we need and how much of those is human? But the whole, particularly the Knowledge Forum conference that I went to in Dubai, was about how do you balance knowledge, that innate sense of knowledge, with artificial intelligence. So how do we combine human intelligence and artificial intelligence in a meaningful manner?
Oh, don't get me wrong. He's trying to sell a product ultimately, so he's rah-rahing and getting as much momentum behind this stuff as possible. His 5 years is probably a realistic 15 years ahead in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, it's just interesting how these conversations are going in different pools. Sorry, Cole, you were gonna join in there.
No, I think one of the interesting things about it from a talent intelligence perspective is, traditionally speaking, and I imagine you guys share this sentiment, we always thought about things in terms of strategic capabilities that companies were trying to retain, right? Yes. And these news articles really got me thinking that this is one of the few areas where talent is seen as a strategic capability at the country level, Absolutely. Not just an organizational level. So I was starting to think of it. I mean, like, AI skills might become the new fissile material of, strategic capabilities that countries are trying to attain or acquire. And I thought that was fascinating, especially to your point, Alan, about, AGI and ASI. If you know that you're on the precipice of that, you can't get left behind, because if you get left behind, you're left behind forever. Right. And so this is, I guess, talent is really entering the global stage in a way that it doesn't happen very often.
100%. And I think, you'll see. So I talked about drawing a line in the sand, and this blog that I've just written that will come out before the pod is released. But it focuses on exactly this, Cole. So it focuses on the fact that countries, in order to drive economic development at a country level, countries are thinking differently about skills and talent, and they are putting in place skills strategies for how they join the dots between economic development, education, and the long-term economic development of their business, of their country, and the skills that they need in order to achieve that. And that's places like the Middle East, it's places like UAE in the Middle East, it's places like Japan, it's places like Singapore. And I think there's a real challenge coming to some of the westernized economies, where whilst we might have industrial strategies, it doesn't necessarily turn into strategic workforce planning at a country level, which is the goal of the future.
Do you see that the education systems in the countries are shifting fast enough to accommodate? Because I know we've discussed the education system in the UK and rote learning, etc., in the past here, and the fact that we just don't seem to be capable of pivoting fast enough to and getting the focus acute enough to get the workforce we need to create. And I don't see anything changing on that. I think
if you look at some of the countries that we've talked about, yes, they are doing exactly that. So they're already saying, there's a gap, but how do we buy it? These are the skills that are critical to our economic development. Where are they in the world? How do we buy them in and attract them for now? And then how do we build our own through education systems? So they are absolutely thinking about the whole life cycle of talent. Is the UK? Question mark. Is Germany? Question mark. Is the US? I don't know. But absolutely, in some of these other countries that are thinking particularly about their skills strategy at a country level, we're seeing that happening on the ground.
Well, one of my favorite sayings regarding to building education and workforce planning is it takes exactly 20 years to get 20 years of experience.
Yes.
And so, these education programs, thinking about primary and secondary education, they're not popping out someone who's going to be an AI engineer with 10 years of experience that's going to be ready to build a leading edge, LLM or foundational model, right? That's going to take a little time. And so really what you needed is your country and its education system needed to invest 10, 20 years ago to make sure that your country and your organizations were ready.
And
So everyone's already chasing, basically. Everyone's already behind if they're building these things now, Cole. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
That's like the best time to plant a tree and all that. But I think that also triggers an issue I'm seeing at the moment, where you're seeing graduate recruitment just fall through the floor at the moment, where so many organisations are just not hiring grad because, and I think, Alan, we discussed this in the past, because people like Sam Altman are saying this model is the equivalent of a graduate. So people aren't hiring graduates. They're saying, well, we can use tech. We don't need graduates anymore, etc. But I think that first entry level for whether it's software engineering or AI stuff or whatever, if we don't have those people coming in, Cole, to your point, how do we get them 20 years of experience? Because they're not going to get any experience.
Do you think also, because not just AI, but the whole COVID thing, kind of the idea of organisations having a 5-year plan is just madness nowadays. It's, you're thinking a couple of years ahead at most organisations. Maybe not the large corporates, but, the kind of the faster growing ones, the medium-sized businesses and that, they're not planning 5 years ahead.
We're talking about so actually the whole of the next quarter we're going to be talking about, first of all, contextual workforce planning. So how do you adapt to what the hell's happening in your environment here and now, rather than necessarily 10 years out, because that doesn't work for all businesses. But if we go back to the country piece and the education piece, the UAE in particular, they've got a skills strategy and economic development strategy that's focused on 2030 with key core measurable goals and numbers. And they've then got an economic and skills development strategy for 2070. So
70?
Yeah,
wow.
2070. So that's how, but that's the point is that actually they're saying if we need to build people that have got this experience, we need to be doing it now. And that's the timeline that we need to be thinking of. We need to be thinking about how do we shape our country for the next 30 years.
Wow.
The position as well-being. And I think that we're trapped in some countries by government cycles in the same way that you're trapped in a company by a CEO cycle.
Well, I think absolutely. I know when we got overexcited about education in the past, I have. As you know, I home educate, so I get very excited about it. In the past, I've suggested I think companies will end up creating their own academies and their own universities in the same way football academies do. They'll identify high potential individuals, super young, and they'll create what they need as an organisation or as an industry, because I just don't think countries are going to keep up for exactly that point, Alison. The governments in most countries only care about a 4-year cycle. They care about looking good until the next election. And they're not thinking 10, 20, 30, 40 years out. They just care about the short-termism. So I can see companies taking the lead and saying, do you know what? We can build faster, build better, be more reactive, change the curriculum as we need, etc. I really could see it coming.
Cool.
The idea of 2070 absolutely blows my mind. I'm working on the basis that by that time we'll all be driving around in deserts fighting over water and oil, Mad Max style. Never mind planning for talent landscape.
To be honest, if you're the UAE, that makes sense then, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean the rest of the world will be there as well by then.
I'm pretty sure that's because
Cole, let me talk to Cole.
Takes over and then demands all our water for its water.
Yeah, call its energy source.
Exactly.
Right, okay, yes, Alison, I hear your request and I shall move the show on. Why don't we talk to Cole?
What do you guys want to talk about?
This is Alison. Over to you.
Sorry, he normally says something. So, Cole, thank you for being on the podcast. He normally does something like that. He normally closes off the news section rather than just throwing it back at me. So, thank you for being on the podcast. And it's we're not going to give you any secrets, Alan, just to kind of help you out on that. It would be really useful for me if you could tell our listeners a little bit about your background, because I think what's really interesting is that you've spent a relatively short amount of time in a lot of in a lot of different companies. So hearing all of that kind of experience and what that's brought to the table as a starting point would be really interesting. So let's just take that. Typically 1-2 years in a role. What's that given you that makes you unique, makes you Cole?
Well, I think one of the things that it gives me is, because one of the things you'll notice if you look at my background is I don't think I've spent 2 times in the same industry.
No.
right? And so, some people go into external consulting and maybe they want to work with a Deloitte or a PwC and get the variety of experiences because they work with many different consulting clients. I personally wanted to get my own development, and, to the point about that you all were making for on development earlier. I wanted the ability to own my own career and make my own development. And one of the ways that I was able to do that is to get the breadth, the depth, and the seniority all by touching a variety of different companies and really focusing on the business problems that they were facing. Another thing that most folks that know me know well is I don't like to be pigeonholed. And so I am known mostly as being a people analytics practitioner, but I'm also an IO psychologist. I've done quite a bit of workforce planning work. I've been a talent management professional, and I've owned workforce intelligence, which we now call talent intelligence, at a few organizations as well. And so I won't say that I'm a world-class expert in all of the above, but I've definitely had a breadth of experiences that I think few others have. And as a consequence, I think I'm able to tie things together that most people haven't been able to tie together. One of which is this idea that I'm playing with right now. And it's that there's this tree of what I'm calling, the value of human capital labor data. And that tree has a variety of branches. And so you have things like people analytics, like workforce planning, like talent intelligence, and even behavioral science that are all trying to get at the same type of problem. And that problem is getting the value out of human capital labor data, but they all have a different skill set or tool set that they're bringing to that equation. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed is taking those different types of skills and tools and applying them to different problems for different organizations.
I love that. So, and because actually what we're really talking about was unlocking the value of human capital to solve a problem, right? And then how do you do that through the data that you've got? So what are the problems that you typically have seen? Because there's going to be recurring themes across all of those industries and the roles that you've had. What are the problems that you have seen recurring over and over again?
Well, I had this quote that a leader gave me earlier in my career in some 360-degree feedback, and it was that Cole has a maniacal focus on adding business value, right, through what we're doing. And basically what they're saying in a nice way is Cole's a maniac, which is fine. But the goal is every organization that I go into, I had a CHRO early in my career who used to use the expression, you've got to know the business cold. And so my goal was immediately to know the business cold. What are the biggest problems that we're facing? And what slice of the pie did human capital play in those problems? And that could be any part of the supply chain that we were mentioning earlier. Mm-hmm. And so I think about things like people analytics usually looks at internal data. Talent intelligence usually looks at external data. And workforce planning is about combining the supply and the demand of those two things together to make actionable insights for an organization, right? And so what are those actionable insights that a particular organization needs? My most recent role was at FedEx, and I was leading a team of about 50 people that cut across people analytics, workforce planning, and talent intelligence. It was a huge breadth of different types of problems that we were tackling. But what we were going through? We were going through what every other industry was going through. What are we going to do about AI? How is that going to disrupt knowledge workers? What is it going to do? How is automation and things like that going to help us augment our frontline workforces and ultimately make us more operationally efficient to deliver packages on time? That was fun and interesting. And when I think about things like what we're doing at Lightcast, it's that pivot from being not just a SaaS company and a services company to being a DaaS company, so data as a service. That's the thing I'm most excited about, because when I look at what's going on in the space that we're in right now, kind of to Alan's point about AGI and ASI earlier, I think a lot of the strategic capabilities of the functions that we run right now, a lot of that required, 5, 10, 15 years of experience to really get like those advanced statistical knowledges or the wide Rolodex that you might need for sourcing or what have you. I think a lot of that's going to become commoditized over the next few years. And so what is the thing that's not going to become commoditized that's going to increase in value is data, and the data and the insights that no other organizations have. And so to me, that's what's exciting about being in a place like Lightcast is I really think that we have a moat of data that no one else on earth has. And that's only going to increase in value, and it's only going to empower functions like the functions that I used to lead to do the things that they've never been able to do before.
That's so cool. And I'll come back to that. I promise I will do. I want to kind of step back a little bit, if we can on that. So can you talk to me a little bit about Directionally Correct? I noticed your plug for a competitive podcast earlier, but talk to me a little bit about that. I listened to the most recent one, right, from Gary Seeger, talking about football analytics. I loved it. I was like, oh my God, it's like a football bench and having the right people in the right place at the right time. But talk to me about why you do that, what you get from it, and what you learn from it.
The motivations for doing the podcast, and I have a corresponding newsletter as well, so I dabble in writing on occasion.
He's plugging that too, Toby, just to let you know.
Well, Toby and I have actually written an article together a while back, and so that was really exciting. But the thing that I really got out of that in the beginning is I used to have this experience that would drive me crazy, and I would be in an organization. I would bring an idea to the table, and somebody would say something along the lines of, wow, that's a really cool idea. Who did you hear that from? And it was like, me. It was my idea. And it was only because like I didn't have what I would call like a credible voice out in the community that, I didn't feel like folks really took me seriously. And so I was like, well, maybe if I just, put a little shingle out and start a podcast, start a newsletter, maybe people will start to take me seriously, or maybe I'll figure out my ideas aren't that good. and so, and only time will tell. And so, I think I'm 3 years into this journey. We've had over 100 guests on the podcast. The thing that I'll say personally that I benefit from it the most, and I imagine that you guys feel the same way about yours, is when you're at big companies, sometimes organizations will make you pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year, $30,000 a year to join a consortium where you get to talk to your peer organizations and have those kind of closed door conversations about what's really going on and how do we fix that. I feel like I get to have that whenever I want because of the podcast, and I get to bring in leaders from all different industries around the world. And it's so interesting because much like this podcast, it's not just the conversation we have on the podcast, it's the one we have before and after, which are quite entertaining. And so it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy doing it.
That's so cool. And you're right, there are so many synergies there. We've talked a lot about whether or not we record the piece before or after, and then we've decided that it's too rude, actually. It's kind of like where, as we said earlier, it's like where all your naughtiness comes out, so we can't do that. But you're right, and I think that for me, and I can't talk for Toby or Alan, but for me, I learn something every single time I get to talk to someone like you. And
I definitely do, Alison, without a doubt. I'm the absolute layman in the room, Cole, for all of these, so I learn all the time.
Right, you're just quietly learning. You're gonna suddenly write a book to rival Toby. You're quietly learning. Cole, do you think there's a difference? Because the way that you talk about the joining together of people analytics, talent intelligence, and workforce planning. Right? I've got a Venn diagram that's talked about that for quite some time in EMEA, and it feels like it's beginning to land now, but actually it's taken a while to feel as if that's going to land on this side of the pond. Now, that might be because I don't have the same voice that you have, or it might be because there's a fundamental difference between the way that US organizations think about access to this data and how it joins up versus other global organizations in other parts of the world. Do you have a take or a view on that?
Oh, yeah. I actually think that both you and I have very much a minority viewpoint. I do not think that it is taken globally, but I don't think it's because we're wrong or that we need to influence other people. I think it's just due to a lack of exposure most of the time. Mm-hmm. Because people analytics teams just don't know what talent intelligence teams do. Yeah. Or they don't know what workforce planning teams do, or they've never worked with some IO psychologists before. And if you've done that and you've crossed those boundaries before, you see that you're all kind of on the same team and you're all trying to tackle different things, and you have different tools at your disposal. And so one of the things that I think about, at some companies, maybe the only data I had at my disposal was from my HCM, like a Workday data or an SAP data or an Oracle data, right? Well, if that's the only tool in your tool chest, you're probably going to look at things like headcount and turnover and hiring rates because that's all you have at your disposal. But if you're at an organization and you're in a talent intelligence function and you have a tool like Lightcast and all it has is external data, well, guess what? That's the tool in your tool chest, and you're only going to be reporting on the things that you have available to you. And in my mind, it's the combinations of these things and how you interweave them that really, and frankly, the integration between these functions and how the business operates is where the true value resides.
It's so interesting because I think you're right. We 100% agree on this, and Lightcast happens to be a common denominator, but that's a relatively recent thing for both of us. I think what's interesting is this kind of plays back to the conversation that we had earlier about, okay, so someone's put an article into Forbes that's talking about this, but actually at least that's starting to talk about that to a wider audience who can then look to be educated, right? So if you're in a function where you read something, you go, hey, that's interesting, human capital, oh, let me think about supply chain, let me think about, then at least we're bringing people on board, right, and starting them on the educational journey. I wanted to touch a little bit on the behavioural science piece that you talked about. So I have absolutely zero knowledge in this space. But I remember the podcast, was it the one we did? Oh, Toby, help me out. Who was the lady at Philips who's done a lot in behavioural science?
Ooh.
Oh, Toby.
Lila
Yes. Yes, thank you. There you are. Who she's not at Philips any longer, but yes, forgive me. But can you and also actually Megan Rife at Volvo Cars talked about behavioural science and bringing that into the equation. If we're not just thinking about data, if we're thinking about broader than our data, how do you think behavioural science plays into our user cases and what organisations should be doing?
No, I think it's a great question. And I think this comes, again, primarily due to my background in industrial organizational psychology. I come at this originally from being a behavioral scientist. Yeah. And so when I look at these things, so let's take a subset of workforce planning like succession planning. Yep. At most organizations, you know who runs a succession planning function? Different talent management and behavioral scientist experts. And you say, well, that's a key part of our talent pipeline. Why is that, we're not looking at it like a supply chain? Why are we looking at it from a behavioral science lens? And it's because the behavioral scientists are the ones that are going to bring the expertise on talent assessment to say, who are the people that are going to be the leaders of the future? Who are the people that we have the highest potential in our organization? And they're going to bring that expertise and overlay that with the pipeline of talent that's going on in that organization. Similarly, you've got things like employee surveys and engagement. And I have this recent riff because you know this, Alison, that skills is a key part of what we think at Lightcast is what's going on in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think historically people have broken down skills into, what are the inputs that go into needing to know how to do something. And maybe it's the knowledge, the abilities, the experiences, or what have you. But I also put the key differentiator in skills is motivation. Yeah. You know what motivation comes from? Behavioral science. Because you can have all the skills in the world, but if you don't have the motivation to go and do something, you're going to be missing the boat. And Toby, I think I'd love to get your perspective on some of these things too, because I know you're a leader in this space.
Oh, I'm really not. It's not me at all.
I did warn you, he can go quiet, Cole. He forgets he's on a podcast. He just
I had my hand up and everything. I did have a question on that, though. So when you were talking around that, well, I started writing an article earlier today, and I decided to delete it because I thought a million people have written this better than me already, so I'm just deleting it. But it was around the fact that loyalty, I think, is going to go further and further through the floor. You've obviously got attrition going up and up, and talent's going to become, I think, more and more mercenary. How does that tie in? One, do you think that's fair, or am I completely off kilter? But also, how does that tie in from a talent management perspective, when you said, you want to see who the leaders of the future are going to be and how things are going to develop, how much harder is that when talent are going to become so much more mercenary and suddenly average dwell time in a role is irrelevant? Because if somebody should be promoted after 6 months, they should be promoted. It could take them 2 years, could take them 3 years. Like, how do we deal with that in a new system where individuals aren't going to have the same loyalty to a company because companies haven't shown that loyalty to their workforce?
Sure. And I think this is such a relevant topic right now. But let me take a step back, Toby, and kind of give you a riff that I have on, I've been thinking for years, why doesn't finance just take over HR? Right. And the answer is, and it gets to the point that you're making, which is finance, historically speaking, treats human beings as interchangeable units, right? It's just we got one unit in, we had one unit leave, and therefore we can replace that unit at a certain cost level. And the reality is human beings aren't units. And they have feelings, they have emotions, they have motivations, they have the things that are going to drive them to 10x or 100x level performance. And they have motivations that are going to lead them to flatline if they're not treated in a human way, right? And so I think what we see at a societal level right now, and I saw a graph, I can't remember who published it, and I apologize for not giving them credit because I thought this was brilliant. And they showed this graph that the demands from employers for productivity, and it was this huge exponential curve upward on employees. And then what it showed was 3 downward curves. And I'm trying to remember what they are. Like one was motivation, another was pay, and another was, engagement or maybe loyalty or some of the things that you mentioned, Toby. And it was like, this is an equation that's going to go wrong, because if organizations are expecting more and more productivity, but they don't have the right level of buy-in from their employees, the equation's going to break. And I think, again, back to Alan's point from earlier, I think everybody thinks that there's this magic pill of AGI or ASI or just AI more generally that's going to fix this equation. And in the long term, it may, but in the near term, these technologies are not mature enough to completely augment or even replace enough workers to bridge that gap. And so I think pretty quickly, organizations are going to have to rediscover when they aren't meeting their targets and that they can't lay off their way out of some of their problems, that they're going to have to invest back in those human beings, at least for the time being, because this is a meaningful data point for those organizations. And we can't just look at humans as interchangeable units.
I love that because whilst you can't look at them as interchangeable units, what we should be doing though is then adding all those units together and saying, as a collective, that is our human capital. And then when you start thinking about access to human capital in the same way that you think about access to other resources, then actually it becomes more strategic through that very conversation, rather than just, well, 1 out, 1 in, 1 plus 1 this. It's a different way of thinking.
But I think that asset allocation comes back to our very first point around supply chain management, in that we're the only asset that will actively walk out your company. We're the only asset where your competitors can actively steal you from the company.
Yeah.
And yet we're
legally.
Except in Germany, not allowed to do it in Germany. Don't try and headhunt someone and they get told off. But it's fascinating to me that we have so much more focus on other elements of asset management versus human capital, where we I don't know, we just seem to be stuck in this death spiral of we don't want to invest in them in case they leave, and it doesn't seem to change.
No, I think you're right. But it's because, in many ways, because of what Cole summarised, in that we're looking at people as individual units and not as the collective. And yet people are individual units with their own thoughts and feelings. And so it's how on earth do we still continue to treat people as individuals, but then think about that as a combined solution? Then
the flip side being, if you are just interchangeable units of labour, that does really lend itself back to that real mercenary element of a workforce, where you'll see huge swathes of the workforce just go from job to job, gig to gig. Yep. That we've spoken for years about the rise of the gig workforce. Maybe that is that element where it's, do you know what? If we are interchangeable, it's going to be just whoever shifts for the right price point.
Well, I think that assumption is based on a premise that organizations can decouple the work and simplify the work enough that
100%.
people don't
Yeah, true.
require institutional knowledge, or what they sometimes call the human factory if you work in manufacturing, where there's just so many things that aren't learned through formal training or on the job or what have you, that you just have to know, that you pick up along the way. And
Yeah.
if you don't simplify the work enough, and I know there's many organizations that are focusing on these things, and the thing that you run into, because I've experienced it myself, is that's a really hard thing to tackle. That's a multi-year problem. And so if you just want to get to the point where you can treat all the workers as mercenaries and just get some gig workers and have them come in and fix everything, and do it at a commoditized rate in terms of the wages that you're paying, well, you're going to have to do a lot of work to prep to get there.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. I'm slightly conscious of time, so I just want to wrap up, if I may, with two questions. So the first call is going to be about Lightcast, and the second is, and I'm warning you about the second so that you might have some time to think about it, is what are your 3 top tips for people to be bringing together people analytics, talent intelligence, and workforce planning in a meaningful way? So that's my kind of get your brain buzzing for your 3 top tips piece. You touched a little bit on the excitement that both of us feel, right, for working for an organisation that is bringing labour market data at a different level. But if I go to the behavioural science piece, right, I'm really interested in what it was that made you join. Thinking about motivations, feelings, interactions, and all the piece that we have just talked. So how come you're now an awesome colleague?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm awesome, but I am a colleague.
Well, we'll find out soon. Ditto.
Is it too early to say, Cole? We're only 1 month in.
I would go with awesome if I were you, because it's being recorded, and then we'll wait and see. I'm still going with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're gonna force me, Alison, to be a little sentimental. I got invited a little over a year ago. It's probably almost a year and a half ago, to speak at the Lightcast conference when I was working at another organization. And I had been familiar with both MC and Burning Glass for years. And so this was not a new relationship, but I kind of just fell in love with the people. I already was familiar with the product. I thought the product was awesome. But I fell in love with the people. And I was like, I know folks at almost every HR tech vendor that's out there, and these are my favorite. And so I had just kind of floated the idea with our mutual colleague, Mark Hansen, quite a while back. And he got me in touch with some internal folks, and turns out that the conversations I was having were actually job interviews, and I just didn't realize it. And it was just so genuine and so real, and I felt like the connection was there. And I know that Lightcast has the passion in this space, and I feel like my passion in this space is palpable. So I think it was just a match made in heaven, and hopefully I turn into that amazing colleague that you're looking for, Alison.
I think you already are, Cole, and you've proved that in the last 45 minutes. So now 3 top tips.
3 top tips. I think it's kind of one top tip with 3 different sub variants of it. And so I would say, first of all, and I know this sounds so basic, but just talk to each other, right? No, go seek out each other's existence, because if you work for a big multinational company, chances are all of your functions exist, and there may even be multiple of your functions in different parts of the business. Go seek each other out. Then once you have sought each other out, do knowledge sharing. And you know what knowledge sharing turns into? It turns into career pathing, because then you can mix and match and share amongst yourselves and see different opportunities and learn different how to tackle different problems that are going on. And then the last is, because you're working together, is pool your data resources. Each of you, again, to my point from earlier, each of you have a different tool in your tool chest. If you combine everyone's tools together, it can not only differentiate what you're doing, but the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts. And so I really feel like that these functions are so much more powerful together. And I'm also the mind of, like, why do this? It's not just for we can all get along and hug each other kind of thing. It's because I actually believe that these functions give the capability to add the most value to organizations. When I was at FedEx, our team, we were bringing, and I'm not afraid to say this, over hundreds of millions of dollars of tangible ROI to the business. You don't do that on accident. You don't just stumble into doing that. And so if you combine your efforts, you can truly bring previously unseen value to organizations, and it's a sight to be seen.
I love that. So Cole still has a maniacal focus on adding business value to an organization.
I'm a maniac.
Is there a song with that in it?
I think there is.
Or she's a maniac.
Please don't sing. Just
I promise I won't.
I was waiting for somebody to do it.
That's never going to be me. Cole, those were that. And I love when you said, "Oh, I'm going to do one top tip with 3 parts." I was like, "Oh, that's cheating." But actually, it really works. Thank you so much. I think that's an awesome note for us to be going. Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Cole. Time absolutely flew by, and yeah, I was listening avidly. How was it for you?
Yeah, this was fantastic. I really, really appreciate you all having me on. And I know we had actually tried to do this like almost a year ago, and my audio wouldn't work for some reason. So I appreciate that we were able to get this rescheduled. So thanks for thinking of me.
I was trying to remember why we didn't go ahead, and there was something ironic, and that was it. It was that we couldn't get 2 podcast hosts to talk to each other.
That's right.
Because of technology. I remember now. Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Cole. That was brilliant. As ever, to our wonderful listeners, if you've enjoyed today's deep dive into the world of people analytics, then please do spread the word. Whether you're yourself a people analytics professional, talent intelligence professional, just someone who loves learning about what makes organizations tick, there's always room for folk like you and those curious minds. A big thank you from me. Big thank you from you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as ever, stay curious, stay analytical, and most importantly, stay intelligent, folks. Bye.
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 Thanks for listening. Before you go, I want to remind you about our generous sponsor, Lightcast. Here's that well-spoken fellow again to tell you about their amazing product.
Lightcast is the global authority on labour market data. By collecting, analysing and refining profiles, job postings and market data globally, Lightcast provides actionable, data-driven talent intelligence, giving HR leaders the context to make better decisions. The world's top companies trust Lightcast to deliver clarity in a complex world of work. For more, visit lightcast.io.